Before we begin, drop a comment below and tell us where in the world you're watching from. We love seeing your names. And if you're new here, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. Well, let's begin. The Blood Moon Festival was the one night a year Dina Ashwood let herself forget. Not everything. Not the important things. Not the way her pack had been stripped of its name, its land, its right to gather. Not the faces of the wolves who turned their backs on her father when the council dissolved them. She didn't forget any of that. But for one night, standing behind her little herb stall with the firelight orange on her hands and the smell of dried valerian and moonbloom filling her nose, she let herself pretend she was just a woman selling remedies at a festival. Not a ghost. Not a leftover. Not the daughter of a dead pack's dead pride. She had arranged everything carefully that morning. The bundles were tied tight with rough cord. Lavender for sleep, fennel for digestion, the small dark bottles of tincture she'd spent 3 weeks preparing. The table was borrowed from the innkeeper, Bisma, who charged nothing and asked nothing, and that alone made her one of the kindest people Dina had ever known. The cloth she'd laid over it was worn thin at the edges but still held its color, a deep gray-green that looked almost intentional in the firelight. Survive the night without causing a scene. That was the rule. That was the only rule. She kept it for 3 years. The festival was loud that evening, louder than usual. Drums somewhere to the east. A fire dancer working near the main square, ribbons of flame arcing above the heads of the crowd. Children chasing each other between the legs of adults. The smell of roasting meat and spiced cider, and the particular sharpness of wolfsbane burnt as offering, the kind of smell that made her stomach clench because her pack had done that too once. Offerings at the blood moon. Prayers sent up in smoke. She didn't burn anything anymore. The first sign something was wrong was the laughter. Not joyful laughter. The other kind, the kind that had an edge to it, a little too loud, a little too sharp, the kind that spread through a crowd the way fire spreads through dry grass. She heard it before she saw anything. Then the crowd near the wine barrels shifted and she saw him. Marcus Feth. Beta heir of the Crestfall pack. 24 years old and already wearing his father's arrogance like a second skin. She knew who he was the way everyone on the fringe knew who the powerful ones were, by the space people gave them, the way conversations lowered when they passed, the particular quality of the smiles directed their way. Careful smiles, deferential smiles, the smiles you gave someone when you needed them not to notice you. He was drunk, not pleasantly drunk. The grinding, belligerent kind. He was moving through the stalls with a cup in one hand and 3 companions at his back, all of them laughing at something she couldn't see, and his path was the meandering, uncareful path of a man who has never once had to watch where he's going because the world has always moved out of his way. Dina saw what was going to happen a full 3 seconds before it did. She reached out. Wait. But her arm wasn't fast enough and Marcus's shoulder caught the edge of her table hard. Not a brush but a proper collision. The full weight of him stumbling sideways and the table went over. The crack of it hitting the cobblestones split through the festival noise. The bottles shattered. The bundles burst their cords and scattered. 3 weeks of careful preparation lay across the ground in pieces, lavender and glass and dark spreading liquid, and her gray-green cloth covered it all like something mourning. The laughter stopped, then started again. Worse. Watch where you put your stall, Marcus said. Not sorry, not embarrassed. The particular tone of someone performing confidence for an audience, already spinning the story into its shape before anyone could tell it differently. He looked at the mess and then at her and his lip curled just slightly. Hazard to foot traffic. You Omegas always think you belong in the main thoroughfare. You walked into it. She hadn't planned to say it. She planned to bite her tongue and bend down and start picking things up and breathe through her nose until the moment passed. 3 years she'd been doing exactly that. But something in the way he said you Omegas, the same tone her pack's enemies had used the night they came to dissolve them, something in that tone reached past 3 years of careful silence and grabbed the part of her that was still underneath everything her father's daughter. The crowd went very still. Marcus blinked. Then his face rearranged itself into something uglier, something that wasn't performance anymore, and he stepped toward her with his chin dropped low, and she didn't step back. She knew she should. Every sensible part of her was screaming to step back. What did you say? I said you walked into it. Your shoulder hit the edge. I watched it happen. You're calling me a liar. I'm telling you what happened. Later she would not remember exactly how it unfolded, whether there was another word spoken, whether the crowd made a sound. The thing she would remember, the only thing, was the movement, fast, careless, the flat of his palm, and then a brightness that wasn't light, that was pain spreading from her cheekbone outward like something broken loose. The sound of it hitting the festival air. Her hand came up on instinct, pressed against her cheek. The skin was already hot. Her eyes were burning. Not from crying, she was not going to cry, not here, not in front of all of them, just the automatic protest of a body that had just been struck, the stupid, helpless tears that came whether you wanted them or not. She pressed her hand harder and held her breath and looked straight ahead. She did not bow her head. She did not know, could not have known, had no way to feel it from where she stood, that from the elevated stone terrace above the festival grounds, a man who had not felt anything in 7 years had just felt something. Not rage. Not pity. Not the cold, measured response of a king assessing disorder in his territory. Something that cracked, like ice over a deep river, like the first fracture before the whole surface gives. King Zoran of Asheville had spent 7 years learning to feel nothing. He was very good at it. He didn't announce himself. That was the thing Dina would never quite be able to explain afterward when people asked. They always expected kings to announce themselves, the sweep of guards, the clearing of the way, the herald's voice cutting through crowd noise. That was how power moved through public spaces. It made itself known, made sure you were ready to receive it, made the moment about itself. King Zoran moved through the festival crowd like weather. She felt it before she saw it, or rather she felt the crowd feel it, the way a field of grass bends all at once before the wind hits, that collective lean and hush. Conversations dropped. People turned. Someone near the wine barrels actually knelt, the cup still in their hand, wine sloshing over their fingers, and they didn't even notice. Marcus noticed. The drunk confidence drained out of him so fast it was almost physical. His friends had already stepped back, 2 of them 3 paces without seeming to decide to, and Marcus himself had straightened, shoulders back, chin up, the performance of composure from a man who suddenly understood he was being watched by eyes that mattered. Dina turned. The king was not what she expected. She'd heard the stories, the same scraps everyone on the fringe collected, that he was hard, that he was fair in the particular cold way that gave you no comfort, that he'd ruled alone since his mate died years ago and something in him had simply sealed shut after that his court was efficient and his laws were kept, and no one who served him well went unprotected, but that he did not smile, not genuinely, not ever. She had not thought about what he would look like. He was taller than Marcus by a full head, broad in the way of men who earn it rather than inherit it, dark hair pushed back from his face. Not young, mid-30s maybe, lines at the corners of his eyes that had nothing to do with laughter. His clothing was fine but not elaborate, deep charcoal and fur, the kind of thing worn by a man who has stopped needing to prove what he is. His eyes found hers immediately. Dark. So, the kind of still that wasn't peace but control, something carefully contained behind it. He walked to her, not to Marcus, not to the scene, not to the crowd that was now a perfect silent ring. He walked directly to her, and with every step she felt the aura of him pressing against the night air. Not threatening, that was the wrong word, more like gravity. Like the moment before a storm when the pressure changes and every living thing holds its breath. He stopped beside her. So close the warmth of him reached her through the cold festival air. He did not look at Marcus. He reached up slowly, so slowly, giving her every chance to move away, and unclasped the heavy fur cloak from his own shoulders and set it around hers. The weight of it was significant. She felt it in her spine. Dark fur, warm already from his body, smelling of wood smoke and something clean she couldn't name. It was absurd. It was too large for her, the hem dragging the ground, the shoulders falling past hers by several inches. He probably looked ridiculous. She stood very still and did not know what to do with her hands. Only then did Zoran look at Marcus. She didn't see his face in that moment. He looking at Marcus, so she only had the view Marcus had. The full weight of the king's attention. Those dark eyes leveled on him with the particular flatness of someone who has decided something and is simply executing it. Marcus's throat worked. My lord, the woman her stall was placed, the king's hand moved fast. His fingers closed around Marcus's collar, and he lifted him. This broad-shouldered beta heir, off the ground one-handed like the effort was negligible. Like Marcus was something he'd found and was deciding whether to keep. Marcus grabbed at the king's wrist, gasping, feet an inch clear of the cobblestones. The festival had gone absolutely silent. Even the drums, somewhere in the distance, had stopped. Zoran held him there for 3 seconds, long enough for the message to form clearly in every watching mind, and then set him down, released his collar. Smoothed it once with a precision that was almost gentle. Almost. Leave the festival, the king said. His voice was quiet. That was the remarkable thing. No one had to strain to hear it because the silence was so complete. Quiet and level and carrying the particular weight of words that don't need volume because they have never not once been argued with. Marcus left. His companions followed without a word. The crowd exhaled, all of them at once. A soft sound like wind through leaves. Conversation started back up slowly, cautiously, the way sounds return after something frightening passes. The drums resumed somewhere east. A child laughed, sharp and bright, and the festival bled back into itself. Zoran turned back to Dina. She was looking at him. She knew she wasn't supposed to. She'd been on the fringe long enough to know the rules, knew that you didn't hold a king's gaze, didn't claim that kind of equality. Especially not when you were dissolved pack and nobody, and standing in the ruins of your herb stall with his expensive cloak hanging off your shoulders like a joke someone was playing on you. She looked at him anyway. Something moved across his face. Too quick to read, gone before she could name it. Are you harmed? No, she said. Her cheek was still burning. She was fairly sure they both knew that was a lie. You may rest in the inner hall tonight. My steward. I don't need a hall. The words came out before she chose them. Flat. Not rude exactly, but not soft either. He went very still. She felt suddenly and acutely aware of exactly what she'd just done. Turned down an offer from the king, in public, with his cloak on her back. The cloak she was still wearing. She should give it back. She should thank him and give it back and bow her head and be grateful and disappear. She reached up to unclasp it from her shoulders. His hand caught her wrist. Not gripping, not rough. 2 fingers and a thumb encircling her wrist with a precision that stopped her mid-motion. Keep it, he said, just for her. She didn't understand the look on his face. She wasn't even sure he understood it. He released her wrist almost as quickly as he'd caught it. The touch so brief it could have been imagined. He stepped back. He looked at her for one more moment with those controlled dark eyes and that expression she couldn't read and couldn't look away from. And then he turned and walked back through the crowd, which parted for him the way it always had, the way it always would. And the space he left behind felt colder and larger than it should have. Dina stood in the scattered remains of her livelihood. The cloak was still around her shoulders, heavy, warm. She told herself to take it off. She didn't take it off. Across the festival, without looking back, Soren walked to his beta Aldrich's side, who had been watching the whole thing with an expression caught somewhere between professional worry and something more personal. My lord, Aldrich kept his voice low. Are you well? Find out her name, Soren said. Of course, my lord. And then, he didn't answer immediately. He was looking at the festival crowd, at the place where she was still standing, small and stubborn with 2 large fur on her shoulders, and her hand not quite pressed to her cheek anymore. Find out her name, he said again, and where she sleeps. Not a threat. Aldrich knew the difference. He said nothing and moved to do as he was told. And the king stood in the cold with something cracked open in his chest that 7 years of careful sealing had not prepared him for at all. She woke to the sound of boots. Not 1 pair. Maybe 3, positioned with the particular stillness of men who had been told to stand somewhere and were going to stand there until someone told them otherwise. She knew that stillness. She'd grown up around warriors. She knew the difference between a man at rest and a man on post. Dina lay on her back in the dark of Bisma's spare room. Low ceiling, 1 window, a mattress that smelled of old hay and something herbal she herself had probably left behind on a previous day, and stared at the ceiling and listened. The boots did not move. She got up. The cloak was folded on the chair where she'd left it. She had folded it very carefully, which she told herself was simply because it was an expensive thing that deserved care. Not because some part of her had been reluctant to let it bunch and wrinkle. That was the story she was telling herself, and she was committed to it. She dressed quickly, opened the door. 2 guards, royal livery, the dark gray of Asheville with the moon crest at the shoulder. Young, both of them, but standing with their feet shoulder-width apart and their chins level in the way of men who had been trained by someone who didn't tolerate slouching. They looked at her when she opened the door, not threatening, just present. Good morning, she said. Good morning, my lady. The taller one said, my lady. She let that sit in the air for a moment. I'm going to the market, she said. What's left of it? I need to. My bottles broke last night and Bisma has some she'll sell me and I need to replace. Of course, he said. Will accompany you. She looked at him, then at the other one. I don't need accompaniment. No, my lady. So I can go alone. Not long, but it contains something. Accompany you, he said again in exactly the same tone, with exactly the same pleasant expression. And Dina understood that the sentence I'll accompany you and the sentence you may not leave without us were, in this particular situation, the same sentence dressed up differently. She breathed through her nose. Fine. The market was half dismantled, the festival already folding itself away. Stall keepers loading carts, sweeping glass, rolling canvas. The cobblestones were tacky in places with spilled cider. And the morning air had that particular emptied feeling of a space that had held a crowd and now held only echoes. She found Bisma at her own stall. Bisma was a short woman, built square, with gray-streaked hair and the kind of face that had been handsome 30 years ago and was interesting now, which was better. She saw the guards before she saw Dina, and her eyebrows went up to somewhere near her hairline. Dina Ashwood, she said slowly. I know, Dina said. The king's guards. I know, Bisma. Following you. I need bottles, the dark ones if you have them, and cord. Bisma stared at her for another full moment, looked at the guards who were standing 10 polite feet away pretending to be interested in the middle distance, and then looked back at Dina with an expression that contained multitudes. I'll get you the bottles, she said, and then you are going to tell me everything. He told her very little. What was there to say? A drunk beta had knocked her stall over. She'd said something she shouldn't have. He'd hit her. The king had intervened. There was a cloak. There were now guards outside her door. That's not nothing, Bisma said. It's not anything, Dina said. He saw disorder and responded to it. That's what kings do. Bisma looked at her the way she sometimes looked at her, with that particular expression that seemed to suggest that Dina was a clever woman who worked very hard at understanding everything except the things closest to her. He put his cloak on you. It was cold. Dina, what do you want me to say? She tied the cord around a bundle of dried sage with perhaps more force than was necessary. That it meant something? That I should be grateful and go prostrate myself at the palace gates? My father was an alpha, a good one. And 7 wolves from 7 packs testified against him at that council, and they dissolved us down to nothing, Bisma. 7 wolves who all bowed very nicely to whoever was powerful that week. She cut the cord. Power doesn't mean protection. It means someone has decided for now that you're useful to them. Bisma was quiet for a moment. And if he's different, then he'll still be here in a month, Dina said. And I'll still be selling herbs and we'll see. The summons came after midday. A young steward, Aldrich, dark-haired, serious-faced, the kind of young man who looked like he'd been born already worried about something, appeared at Bisma's door with the stiff posture of someone delivering a message he wasn't entirely sure would be well received. The king requests your presence, he said. Does he? Yes, my yes. At the palace. This afternoon, if it pleases you. She looked at him, and if it doesn't please me, he blinked, opened his mouth, closed it. It was clear that outcome had not been covered in his briefing. I'll come, she said, because she was not in fact interested in a second incident with royal guards, and she was also, she admitted this to herself in the small private part of her mind where she was sometimes honest, she was also curious. Curious in a way that bothered her. She'd spent the morning trying not to think about dark eyes and the weight of a hand around her wrist, and she had mostly failed at both. The palace was not what she expected. Not the building itself. That was exactly what she'd expected, black stone and high arches and the kind of permanence that says we have been here and we will remain, the way only packed seats of power were built, rooted like they grew from the earth itself. It was quieter inside than she thought it would be, not empty. Servants moved through the corridors. Guards stood at intervals. She passed 2 advisors deep in conversation who didn't look up, but there was no noise for its own sake. No performance. The spaces were large and they were used, and that was all. Aldrich led her through 3 corridors and a courtyard and up a staircase that opened onto a long room with windows along one side looking out over the valley below. The king was there. Alone, which surprised her. Standing at one of the windows with his hands clasped behind his back looking out. He changed from last night. Still dark colors, but different ones, the heavy fur gone, a simpler thing. He looked without the festival crowd and the crisis and the weight of the moment like a man standing in a room. Somehow that was more unnerving, not less. He turned when she entered. She stopped at a respectful distance and did not bow her head. His eyes moved to her cheek. Briefly. The bruise had come through overnight, sitting below her cheekbone in a yellowing ring. She hadn't covered it. She didn't see the point. Dina Ashwood, he said, my lord, of the Ashwood pack. The dissolved Ashwood pack, she said and kept her voice even. If you're going to say it, say all of it. Something moved at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile. Something that had considered becoming one and decided against it. Sit, please, she sat. He remained standing, which she suspected was habit rather than power play. He looked like a man who forgot to sit. She'd known 1 or 2 like that. Her father had been the same, always upright, always ready, as if sitting down meant something he hadn't yet earned. You refused shelter last night, he said. I had shelter, Bismu's spare room. You refused my shelter. Yes, he looked at her steadily. Why, not why did you, just why? Like he expected the actual answer, not the polite version. She considered him for a moment. The steady dark eyes, the lines at their corners, the patience of a man who had learned to wait for things or had stopped expecting them quickly. Because I don't know what it costs, she said finally. Shelter always costs something. I'd rather know what I owe before I accept it. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable exactly. It had texture to it. It costs nothing, he said. Everything costs something, my lord. Then call it, he paused and something shifted in his face, not rehearsed. Like he was actually working through it in real time, looking for the word. Call it a wrong being corrected. What happened last night was an offense against order, against a member of this territory. No cost. She looked at him. He looked at her. Marcus Veth, she said. His father is your ally. His father is his father. Marcus is responsible for Marcus. And you'll hold to that. When his father comes to you and tells you his son was humiliated at the festival, Creston Veth can tell me whatever he likes, Soren said. Marcus Veth struck a woman in my territory in front of my subjects. What I do about that is not negotiable. She didn't answer immediately. She was listening to the way he said it. Not angry, not performing, just flat and final. The tone of a man stating something that has already been decided and therefore requires no emphasis. Sounded dangerously like he meant it. Don't, she told herself. Don't decide he means it after one conversation. I'll return your cloak, she said. I told you to keep it, my lord, Soren. She stopped. He said it simply, without weight, not making a moment of it, just correcting the form of address the way you might correct a mispronunciation. Like it was practical. Like they were past something they hadn't agreed to be past yet. Her heart did something inconvenient. You don't know me, she said. No, he agreed. I'd like to. The words landed quiet and careful in the still air of the room, and Dina sat with them and tried to decide if they frightened her more than they didn't. Outside the window, the valley spread out below, wide and cold and lit with afternoon sun, and the city moved through its day at the foot of the mountain like it had no idea that something in this room was happening, something small and wordless and not yet named. She pressed her thumb against the inside of her wrist where his hand had been last night. She could still feel the shape of it. I'll think about the cloak, she said. His chin dipped. Just slightly. Somewhere in the neighborhood of acknowledgement. And she made herself stand, and she made herself walk to the door, and she did not look back because she was fairly certain that if she looked back and found him watching her, still and patient and entirely too steady, she would lose some small necessary battle she hadn't figured out yet how to fight. She did not look back. Outside the door, alone in the corridor, she pressed her hand flat against the stone wall and breathed. Her cheek ached. Her wrist felt warm. She had not given the cloak back. 3 days passed. Dina told herself they were ordinary days. She rebuilt her stall, new cloth, dark blue this time, from a bolt Bismuth sold her at cost and pretended was charity. She restocked what could be restocked, lost what couldn't, and calculated the damage with the particular arithmetic of someone who has learned to treat disaster as a budget problem because the alternative is sitting down and not getting up. The guards were still there. 2 of them always. Rotating in shifts she hadn't asked about and didn't intend to. They didn't speak unless spoken to, didn't hover, didn't interfere. They simply existed in her periphery with the steady, unobtrusive presence of, and she hated that this was the word her mind kept reaching for, safety. He hated it because it felt good. She didn't trust things that felt good. Good things had a way of ending with a council vote and 7 wolves with their hands raised, and her father's pack name struck from the records like it had never existed. On the second morning, she brought the guards tea. Not as a gesture, just because it was cold and she had a fire going, and it seemed wasteful not to. The one called Perrin had taken it with both hands and said, "Thank you, my lady." With such genuine surprise that she'd had to turn away before her face did something she'd regret. On the 3rd day, Aldrich came back. She was grinding fennel root when she saw him crossing the market square toward her. And she knew immediately from the set of his shoulders that this was not a casual visit. "What happened?" she said, not a question. He stopped at her stall, looked at her bundles, her bottles, the neat arrangement she'd rebuilt, looked briefly at the guards, then back at her. "Creston Veth arrived this morning," he said, "with his son." She set down the grinding stone. "The king is in council," Aldrich continued. "I wanted you to know before." He stopped, chose words carefully. "There may be pressure to resolve the incident privately. Pack to pack, without formal censure." She understood what he wasn't saying. Without formal censure meant Marcus walked away clean. It meant the king absorbed whatever cost came with humiliating a beta heir publicly, packaged it as a misunderstanding, smoothed it over with alliance language and a shared cup of something expensive. It meant her face, still yellowed, still tender when she pressed it wrong, was just a festival incident. Unfortunate. Regrettable. "Move along, I see," she said. "The king has not agreed to anything," Aldrich said quickly, and there was something in his voice she couldn't quite read. Emphasis, maybe, reassurance. "I want to be clear about that. He has not agreed. But Creston Veth will push." "Creston Veth pushes on everything," he said, and the flatness of it told her this was not new, not specific to her, just the permanent condition of dealing with that particular family. She nodded slowly. "Thank you for telling me." He hesitated. "The king asked me to." Another pause, longer. "He wanted to know if you were well." She looked up at him. Aldrich's expression was carefully neutral in the way of a man who has noticed more than he intends to let on and is managing it professionally. "Tell him I'm fine," she said. "Yes, my lady, and Aldrich." He paused mid-turn. What does he want with me? Actually, not the diplomatic answer. He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. "I don't know," he said finally. "But I've served him for 4 years. I've seen him respond to disorder before." He glanced toward the palace on the hill. "He's never asked me to find out someone's name before, not like that." He left before she could respond. She stood at her stall and looked at her hands and tried to think about fennel root. She was packing up at dusk when Marcus found her. Not with his father. Not with guards. Just 2 of his companions from the festival. Both sober this time, which made them more deliberate and therefore more dangerous than the drunk versions. He looked different in daylight without an audience. Younger, maybe. Harder to hate in the abstract, which she resented because the bruise on her face was very concrete. He stopped in front of her stall with his hands loose at his sides and his chin at an angle that was trying for casual and landing somewhere closer to rehearsed. "I came to speak to you," he said. "I can hear you." She said and kept packing, alone. She glanced at Perrin, who was watching Marcus with the focused disinterest of a man who has been told not to intervene unless necessary and is currently determining what necessary means. "I'm busy," she said. "My father is with the king right now," Marcus said, quieter. The performance dropped a notch, and what replaced it was something she hadn't expected. Not cruelty, but something closer to unease. "Whatever happens in that room is going to affect both of us. I thought there might be something we could." He stopped. "Tried again. I shouldn't have hit you." She stopped packing, not because the words were extraordinary, they weren't. They were 4 words in the right order without much behind them. But she'd spent 3 days not expecting them, and the absence of something you don't expect still registers when it arrives. She turned and looked at him properly. He was holding her gaze, barely, but holding it. "No," she said. "You shouldn't have. My father wants the king to call it a misunderstanding. He'll offer land rights, probably water access to the eastern ridge." A muscle moved in his jaw. "The king will likely take it. That's how it works." "I know how it works. I wanted to tell you." He stopped again. The unease had deepened into something else. Something that looked uncomfortably like shame, which was interesting on a face that had worn arrogance so naturally 2 ago. "I wanted to tell you before you heard it as a sealed decision, because you deserve to hear it from me. What I did was, Marcus." He went quiet. "Go home," she said, not unkindly, just finally. He looked at her for a moment longer. Then he nodded once and turned, and his companions fell in behind him, and she watched them go and felt nothing triumphant, nothing relieved, just tired, just the particular exhaustion of being a person that other people keep making decisions about. She picked up the last bottle. Behind her, Perrin said nothing, which she appreciated. The knock came late, not Aldrich this time. One of the older guards, a woman, short, broad, gray at her temples, the kind of face that had stopped being surprised by things years ago. She introduced herself as Sina, head of the king's household guard, and she said it the way people say things when they've been asked to say them carefully. "The king would like you to walk with him," Sina said. Dina looked at her. "Now, the valley path. He goes most evenings." Pause. "He thought you might like air." Kaelin said no. She had the no ready, formed, and waiting. The same no she'd been keeping polished for 3 days. The sensible no, the self-preserving no. "Give me a moment," she said instead. He was waiting at the lower gate. Alone, which surprised her again. No Aldrich, no guards trailing at distance. Just him standing at the edge of the path that dropped down from the palace grounds into the valley. Hands in his pockets in a way that looked strange on a king and entirely natural on this particular man. He glanced at her when she came through the gate. Something in his face settled just slightly, like a thing that had been held tense and released. They walked, not talking at first. The valley path wound through low scrub and old stone. The kind of landscape that looked like it had been there since before anyone started naming things. The sun was nearly gone. The sky, that deep bruised blue that came just before proper dark, and the first stars were showing above the eastern ridge. It was not uncomfortable, the silence, that bothered her. Silence with a stranger was supposed to be uncomfortable. "Creston Vath wants it called a misunderstanding," she said eventually. "I know. Aldrich told me you haven't agreed." "I haven't." She looked at him sideways. He was watching the path ahead, hands still in his pockets, walking at a pace that matched hers without seeming to try. "What are you going to do?" "Hold him to account. His father will pull the Eastern Ridge water rights." "I know, that's not a small thing." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." He said it the way someone says something they've already measured and decided, not dismissing it, just decided. She was quiet for a moment. "Why?" He looked at her then, directly. In the fading light, his eyes were very dark. The controlled stillness she'd seen at the festival replaced by something less managed. Something that looked briefly like a man who wasn't entirely sure how to answer. "Because it matters," he said. And then before she could parse that, "Tell me about your pack." The shift caught her off guard. You don't have to. Simple, no pressure in it." She looked at the path, the scrub, the old stones. "My father was a good alpha," she said, not the loudest, not the most feared, but the kind of wolf that other wolves told their problems to. She paused. "We had 43 members at our peak. Ashwood Valley, the northern fields. We were fine, not powerful, just fine." "What happened?" "Politics happened." She kept her voice flat. She'd learned to talk about it flat. "Another pack wanted our valley. They didn't want a war, too visible, too costly. So instead 3 of them went to the High Council and said my father had broken covenant law. They had witnesses. The witnesses were wrong, but they were consistent, and consistency matters more than truth when the council wants a reason." He stopped walking. He stopped too, turned to face her. 4 more packs joined the vote because they owed favors. 7 total, that's the threshold. She looked up at him. 43 wolves dissolved to nothing in 1 afternoon. My father died 8 months later. Not from anything dramatic, just from the particular kind of grief that gets into the body and won't come out. She pressed her thumbnail against her finger. "I've been selling herbs for 3 years. I don't have a pack. I have a stall and a borrowed room and a very patient innkeeper." He was looking at her with that expression she couldn't read, the one that was too still to be nothing and too contained to be named. "I'm not telling you this for sympathy," she said. "I'm telling you so you understand why I didn't take the shelter, why I won't." She stopped. "Won't what?" She looked at him. At the dark eyes, the careful face, the lines of a man who had sealed something in himself years ago and she didn't know what he was doing. She didn't know why he was standing in a valley at dusk with her instead of in a palace making alliance decisions. "Won't just trust you," she said, "because you're a king and you were kind to me twice. I've known wolves who were kind until it cost them something, and then they voted." The silence after that was different, fuller. He didn't fill it with reassurance. Didn't tell her she was wrong or that he was different or any of the things that would have been easy to say and would have cost her nothing to dismiss. He just stood there in the near dark and let the words exist. "That's fair," he said finally, just that, "that's fair." And somehow in its smallness, in its complete absence of argument, it hit her harder than a long speech would have, because it meant he'd heard her, actually heard her. Not the complaint, not the baggage, not the problem to be managed. Her. Something moved in her chest, low and warm and alarming. Above them the blood moon was rising, full and red and enormous, hanging over the eastern ridge like it was watching. The way it always watched, the old stories said. The way it remembered. He had never believed the old stories. She looked at the moon and felt, for no reason she could explain with any logic, the sudden and irrational sense of being seen, not by him, by something older. Something that lived in the particular frequency of a blood moon over a valley. In the way two wolves stood close together in the dark and breathed the same cold air. Her wolf stirred. She hadn't felt her wolf properly in years. Grief had muffled her the way grief muffled everything. A dull presence, a weight, nothing sharp. But now standing here, she felt her lift her head. Felt her turn toward the man beside her with a recognition that had nothing to do with Dina's own careful mind. He took a step back, he felt it. She could see it in the slight tension that moved through him, the way his head turned toward her, something sharp entering those dark eyes. "What is it?" he said. "Nothing." Her voice was steady, he was proud of it. "It's late, I should besmell wonder." He looked at her for a long moment. In the red moonlight his face was different, something older in it, something that matched the mood of the valley and the old stones, and the way the blood moon sat heavy in the sky. Dina, just her name, the way he'd said Zoran in that room, practical, simple, something that didn't need weight because it already had it. She stopped. "Tomorrow," he said. "Come to the palace. Not because I'm asking you to trust me, just come." He should say no, she was going to say no. "What time?" she said. Something shifted in his face. Not a smile, still not quite a smile, but the shape of one. The ghost of the thing, somewhere behind his eyes, warm and private and not meant for anyone but the valley and the moon and her. "Morning," he said. "Whenever you're ready." She nodded once and turned and walked back up the path. Her wolf was still awake, still turned toward him, still knowing something Dina hadn't given her permission to know. Above the valley the blood moon burned red and it remembered what it always remembered, that bonds don't ask for permission. They simply arrive like seasons, like grief, like the particular warmth of standing close to someone in the dark and not moving away. Dina pressed her hand to her chest as she walked. Her heart was doing something she hadn't felt in a very long time. She told it to stop. It did not stop. She came in the morning. Not early. She had her stall to open, her bundles to arrange, the ordinary machinery of her ordinary life to run before she did anything else. She told herself that was practicality. She told herself a lot of things in the hour between waking and walking up the palace path, and most of them were reasonable, and none of them touched the real reason she'd barely slept. Aldrich met her at the gate. He looked, she thought, like a man who had also barely slept but for different reasons. "There's been a development," he said. He stopped walking. "What kind?" Creston Veth spent the night in council with 3 of the king's senior advisors. He said it carefully. The way he said things when you were managing how they landed. "They've drafted a formal petition, requesting that the king recuse himself from any decision involving you, on grounds of partiality." She heard the word partiality and felt something cold move through her. "They're saying he's compromised," she said. "They're saying his response at the festival was disproportionate. That placing his personal cloak on a dissolved pack Omega constitutes a statement of." Aldrich stopped again. Chose the next word with visible care. "Favoritism, that it undermines his impartiality as territorial king." She stood very still in the morning light and let that settle. This was it. This was the thing she'd known was coming in the formless way you know weather is coming before the clouds arrive. The cost. The thing that kindness always had underneath it waiting, the bill that arrived after the warmth. "He should take the recusal," she said. Aldrich looked at her sharply. "He should take it," she said again and kept her voice even because she meant it. She genuinely meant it, even though something in her chest was doing something painful and complicated. Creston Veth is his alliance. The Eastern Ridgewater rights are real. His advisors aren't wrong that a king showing personal interest in a dissolved pack herb seller is a political liability. She pressed her thumb into her palm. Tell him I said so. You can tell him yourself, Aldrich said. He's waiting. He was in the small receiving room, not the large one. Closer to the courtyard, plainer, the kind of room used for conversations that weren't meant to be formal. He was standing when she came in. She was beginning to think he simply always stood, and he had the particular look of a man who had been awake through the night making decisions and had arrived somewhere near dawn at a stillness that was either peace or exhaustion and possibly both. He looked at her face when she walked in. Bruise still there, fading at the edges now to that sickly green yellow that meant it was healing. You've heard, he said. Aldrich told me. She stayed near the door. You should take the recusal. He looked at her steadily. No, Zoran, no. The flatness of it stopped her. Not aggressive, just sealed. The tone of something decided long before this conversation, decided maybe somewhere on a valley path in red moonlight. You'll lose the water rights, she said. 3 senior advisors are already against you. Creston Veth has been building alliances for 15 years, and he'll use every one of them. I know what he'll use. Then why? She stopped, pressed her hand flat against the door behind her. This isn't I'm not worth this. I'm not worth your water rights and your advisors and your alliance with the Veth pack. I'm a herb seller from a dissolved pack and Marcus hit me at a festival and you responded to it, and that meant something, it did, but it doesn't have to mean this. He crossed the room, not fast, deliberately. Each step the choice of a man who was choosing consciously to close the distance he could have maintained. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her chin up slightly to hold his gaze, close enough that she could see the exact quality of the exhaustion in his face. The particular lines of a man carrying something heavy who has decided to carry it anyway. My mate died, he said. She went very still. 7 years ago, fever. It moved fast, 4 days between the first sign and the end. He said it the way people said things they had said so many times inside their own heads that the words had worn smooth. I was with her for the last 2. I didn't leave the room. A breath. When she died, my wolf went quiet. Not grief, quieter than grief. Like a fire that's burned down to nothing. Just nothing there. She didn't speak. She wasn't sure she was breathing. I ran this territory for 7 years on nothing, he said. I was good at it. I'm still good at it. You can govern from nothing. You can make decisions and hold alliances and keep order from nothing. His eyes held her steady, something raw in them she hadn't seen before, something that his controlled face had been keeping behind it since the festival. At the festival, when you pressed your hand to your face and didn't bow your head, something cracked open. His jaw moved. I don't know what that means yet. I don't know what to do with it. But I know what I felt, and I know what the blood moon was last night, and I know that I have been standing in this room since before dawn deciding whether to be afraid of it. The silence after that had weight, real weight, the kind you felt in your ribs. And she said, her voice was not entirely steady. I decided I'm done governing from nothing. She looked at him, this man, this sealed-shut king who had put his cloak on her shoulders in front of a crowd and stood in a valley at dusk and let her worst truth sit in the air without flinching, who had apparently stood in this room since before dawn arguing with himself and arrived at this. Something moved in her chest. Her wolf lifted her head and pulled, and Dina grabbed hold of herself and held. You don't know me, she said, quieter this time. I know you brought my heart's tea, he said, in the cold, because it seemed wasteful not to. She blinked. Perrin told me? The corner of his mouth moved. That almost smile, that ghost of one. He seemed affected by it. She looked away. At the window, the courtyard below, morning light on stone. She needed somewhere to put her eyes that wasn't his face. The petition, she said. The advisors. I'll handle the advisors. Creston Veth. I'll handle Creston Veth. You can't just, she turned back. Handle everything, Zoran. That's not how this. I've seen packs fracture over less. I've seen good leaders lose everything over the wrong alliance at the wrong time, and you standing here telling me you'll handle it like it's a market dispute. Dina. Her name in his mouth again. That particular way he said it, not soft exactly, just precise. Like it was the right word for a specific thing. I'm not asking you to trust me, he said. You told me last night you can't, not yet. That's fair, that's still fair. He held her gaze. I'm asking you to stay, in the palace. Not as a kept thing, not as he paused, working through it. As yourself. As someone who should not be sleeping in a borrowed room and rebuilding a borrowed stall in a market where anyone can reach her. She stared at him. Marcus Veth is still in the city, he said, and the warmth in his voice dropped into something else entirely when he said the name, something very quiet and very cold. His father is in my council room. You have 2 guards and a valley path and Bismaz's spare room. His jaw tightened. It's not enough. The care in it undid her. Not the power, not the resources, not the fact of him being a king, the care. The specific, particular care of someone who had looked at her situation and thought about what she actually needed and was offering exactly that. She had not had that in a very long time. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth briefly, looked at the ceiling. Bree, I'm not your mate, she said finally, came out strange, little raw. No, he said, you're not. Pause, not yet. he said, very quiet. She looked at him sharply. He met her eyes without flinching, without claiming it. Just letting it exist in the air between them as a thing that was true and did not need to be argued. Her wolf made a sound she felt in her bones. I need to think, she said. Take the time. I have a stall. Perrin will watch it. Perrin is a palace guard. He grew up on a farm. Perrin said. He'll be fine. She stared at him. Something between a laugh and a cry was doing complicated things at the back of her throat, and she swallowed it down and pressed her hands together and tried to be sensible. If I stay, she said carefully, I'm not a kept thing. No, I keep my stall. My work, I don't disappear into this place. No, and if I decide this is wrong, if I decide I can't, then you leave, he said. No cost. She looked at him for a long moment. He looked back. The morning light was fully in the room now, falling across the plain stone floor and the plain walls, and this man who had governed from nothing for 7 years and had apparently decided somewhere before dawn to stop. Show me where I'd stay, she said. What she didn't see, what she couldn't see from the small receiving room, was the corridor outside it, where Creston Veth had been walking, where he'd stopped, where he'd stood perfectly still listening through the gap in the door left by a servant in a hurry. His face doing a sequence of things that settled finally into the expression of a man who has just understood the shape of a threat and is already deciding what to do about it. He turned and walked back toward the council room. His footsteps were very quiet for a large man. It was Senna who brought the news 2 hours later. Dina had been shown a room. Stone walls, one window, a proper bed, a shelf along one wall that she'd immediately started mentally arranging herbs on, which was how she knew some part of her had already decided. She was standing at the window looking at the courtyard below when Senna knocked and opened the door without waiting, which told her immediately that whatever was coming wasn't good news. The Veth Beta, Senna said. Marcus, Dina turned. He went to the market an hour ago. Senna's face was professionally blank in a way that barely covered something else. Perrin was watching the stall. Marcus's men surrounded it. 4 of them. Pause. Perrin held them, but he's one guard. And by the time the second shift arrived, Marcus was gone. The stall, Dina said. Her voice was flat and strange to her own ears. Destroyed. I'm sorry. The bottles, everything. She stood in the window light and felt the cold come in. Everything. The 3 weeks before the festival, the restocking after, the cord and the new bottles and the blue cloth from Bismaz Bolt. Gone. Not because it was worth much. It wasn't, but it was hers. It was the thing she'd built in the years after the dissolution. The small specific proof that she could sustain herself, that she didn't need a pack or a name or anyone's charity to survive. Gone because she'd crossed a man who had never once had to watch where he was going. Something shifted in her chest. Not grief, darker than grief. Older. She had thought she was past this particular anger, the kind that lived below the ordinary kind. The kind that had no place to go because the target was always larger than her, always better positioned, always able to absorb the consequence and continue. The kind of anger that turned eventually inward. She picked up the fur cloak from the chair where she'd left it, put it around her shoulders, walked to the door. Where is the king? She said. Senna looked at her. Something moved in the older woman's face. Surprise maybe, or recognition. The expression of someone seeing a thing they weren't expecting and finding they approve of it. Council room, she said. 3rd floor. Take me, said Dina. She didn't knock. She pushed the council room door open and walked in, and the full room. 7 advisors, Creston Veth, 2 scribes, and the king turned to look at her with the collective expression of people who had never once had a dissolved pack herb seller in a too large fur cloak walk into their council and clearly did not know what to do with it. Zoran was on his feet before anyone spoke. Dina, your beta heir, she said, looking directly at Creston Veth, destroyed my stall this morning. In broad daylight. With 4 men. She kept her voice even. She was distantly proud of that. Everything I rebuilt after the festival. Gone. The silence in the room was total. Creston Veth's face was composed in the particular way of a man caught in something who has not yet. He turned to Zoran. And this was the thing. This was the thing she hadn't planned, hadn't calculated, hadn't carefully considered from all angles before doing it. She just looked at him. At the dark eyes already hard. Already past the composure he'd been wearing a moment ago. Something molten and controlled underneath. You said you'd handle it, she said, quiet, just for him in a room full of people. I'm asking you to handle it. The room held its breath. Zoran looked at her for one long moment. Something moved across his face, fierce and warm and decided and completely terribly unguarded. He turned to Creston Veth. Get out of my council room, he said. Creston Veth did not leave quietly. That was the thing about men like him. They had never, not once in their lives, been asked to leave a room, and the experience of it moved through him visibly like weather crossing a flat plain. She watched his face go through several things in quick succession. Disbelief first. Then the particular cold of a man recalculating. Then something that had the shape of compliance and the temperature of a promise. He rose from his seat with the measured patience of someone who was not done, who would never be done, who was simply moving the conversation to a different room. "My lord," he said, and the title in his mouth sounded like a formality he was granting on loan. "We will speak again." "We will," Zoran said, flat, final. "Later." Creston's eyes moved to Dina once, brief, the kind of look that didn't need to be long to be clear. Then he walked to the door and his two attendants followed and the room breathed again, advisors shifting in their seats, the scribes staring at their parchment with great industry. Zoran looked at the room. "Out," he said, not cruel. "Just done with the audience." They filed quickly, all of them. Scribes first, then advisors in a cluster. One of them, a thin man with gray-streaked temples who she would later learn was Hadric, senior counsel, the one who drafted the recusal petition. Pausing at the door to cast a look back at the two of them that contained an entire argument he'd apparently decided not to make aloud. Then he left too. The door closed. Zoran turned to her, and she saw for the first time that the composure was gone. Not entirely. He was not a man who came entirely undone. She suspected that was simply not how he was built, but the control had thinned and underneath it was something hot and restrained, moving behind his eyes the way fire moved behind glass. "Are you hurt?" he said. "No," Perrin held them off before. "Are you hurt?" She stopped, looked at him properly, understood that the question was not about the stall. "I'm angry," she said, "so I'm just angry." He moved to the window, stood with his back to her, hands on the ledge, looking out at the courtyard below where the morning had gone on perfectly normally without knowing it was supposed to stop. "I should have moved faster," he said. "You couldn't have known he'd—" "I knew Creston Veth." His voice was quiet and rough-edged. "I've known him 15 years. I knew when he left this room last night that he'd find another way to press the point." His knuckles on the ledge. "I let you walk out to a borrowed room in a market stall when I should have been faster." She looked at his back, the tension in his shoulders, the specific shape of a man blaming himself in the particular way of people who have learned to carry responsibility like it's the only thing keeping them upright. He crossed the room. She didn't plan it. Her feet just moved the way they'd moved at the festival when she'd said you walked into it. Past the part of her that calculated and into the part that simply responded. She stopped beside him at the window, not touching, just beside him, the way she'd stood on the valley path. "My father used to do this," she said. He turned his head slightly. After anything went wrong, he'd find the exact place where he could have done differently and he'd stand there. In his mind. For hours sometimes. She looked out at the courtyard. "My mother used to say he was the only wolf she'd ever met who could guilt himself about the weather." A silence. "Did it help?" Zoran said. "The guilt?" "No," she said, but he couldn't stop. Another silence, longer with more in it. "I can't either," he said quietly. "I know." She felt him look at her fully then, the weight of it. She kept her eyes on the courtyard. "My stall is gone," she said again, "and I'm standing in a palace council room in a dead woman's." She stopped. Felt him move very still beside her. She closed her eyes for a half second. "Stupid, I'm sorry. That wasn't, I didn't mean to say it like that." It was his mate's, he said, not accusing, just saying it. Confirming the thing they'd both been not saying since she'd first put it on. "The cloak. I didn't know when you gave it to me." "I know." He was quiet for a moment. "I know you didn't. I gave it without, I didn't think about what it was. He stopped. Started again. "It was the only thing I had on me that was warm enough. That's all it was." She heard the lie in it, not a cruel lie, a self-protective one, the kind you told yourself first and then found yourself telling aloud. "Soren," he said nothing. "You can tell me." The courtyard went on below them. A dog crossed it. Someone laughed near the kitchen door, a sharp, bright sound that had no idea it was interrupting anything. "She would have liked you," he said finally. So quiet she almost missed it. "Rena." She didn't bow her head either. Not to anyone. Something moved in his voice. Careful and old and still after 7 years, not entirely healed. "She would have laughed at you calling Hadric a political liability to his face." Dina's throat felt tight. "I didn't call him." "You looked at him when you walked in," Soren said, and the ghost of something warm moved across his face. "You went straight to Creston and you looked at Hadric. He's been in that council room for 9 years and no one has ever looked at him like he was a problem they were deciding whether to bother with." She looked down at the cloak. The dark fur, worn soft with time and care. "I'll give it back," she said. "She's been gone 7 years," he said. "It's a cloak, Dina. It's not just a cloak." "No," his voice settled, "it's not. But I gave it to you because." He turned from the window. Turned to face her fully, and this close in the plain morning light with the composure gone and the walls thinned, he looked like what he was. A man who had carried something along for a very long time and was tired. Just tired. "Because when I saw you press your hand to your face and refuse to bow, I felt something. And I panicked. And the only thing I could do that made sense was put something warm on you." He breathed. "That's all it was. That's the whole of it." She looked at him. He looked back, not performing. Not managing, just looking. "That's not a small thing," she said softly. "What you just told me." "No," he agreed. "It's not. The decision from the council came before evening. Hadrick delivered it himself, which he supposed was his way of managing the loss, controlling the form of it since he couldn't control the content. He came to the room she'd been given and knocked properly, waited. "The king has formally censured Marcus Veth," he said. "Public record. Pack Law, Article 9, unprovoked physical aggression against a non-combatant in territorial space." He said it cleanly, professionally, with the voice of a man who had argued against it until he hadn't. "Creston Veth has withdrawn his petition." He waited. He also withdrew the water rights offer, Hadrick said. The pause before it was delivered, she thought. A small punishment. A reminder of cost. "The Eastern Ridge Alliance is suspended pending renegotiation." "I see," she said. The king accepted that outcome. His gray eyes held hers. Not warm, not hostile. Something more complicated. The look of a man reassessing something he'd been certain of. "I've served him 11 years. I've never seen him accept a material loss without negotiating." She said nothing. "I wanted you to know," Hadrick said carefully, "what was spent." "Thank you," she said, "for telling me." He nodded once, precise, and left. She sat on the edge of the bed in the stone room with its one window and breathed. She understood what Hadrick had done. He'd come himself, laid the cost in front of her without accusation, let her hold it. It was the action of a man who opposed her presence but was not, at the root of it, dishonest. She could work with that. Maybe, eventually. She looked at the shelf on the wall. Already she'd arranged in her mind the order of things. Fennel at the left, valerian middle, the tinctures at the right where the light didn't reach them. Her hands knew the arrangement even with nothing to arrange. She could stay. That was the first time she let herself say it plainly without conditions attached. She could stay. She found him at dusk on the valley path. He wasn't surprised to see her. Or if he was, whatever expression crossed his face happened too fast to catch. He simply stopped walking and waited, and she came to stand beside him in the place where they'd stood before. The scrub and the old stones, and the sky doing its thing above them. The blood moon was not full tonight. Just the ordinary moon, yellow-white, rising slow. "Hadrick came to tell me," she said, "about the water rights. I know, you should have negotiated. Probably. You lost a material asset because she stopped. Started differently. Because of me, because of my stall and my bottles and a beta heir who'd never been told no. Because of what's right," he said. "Even not a performance of virtue, just a statement." She looked at him sideways. "You're very inconvenient," she said. His mouth moved. The ghost smile more visible tonight, closer to the surface. "I've been told." "By who?" "Aldrich, regularly." She looked away before she smiled back because she wasn't ready to do that yet. Let him see that, the particular smile that meant you've gotten past something. She turned the cloak over in her hands. She'd brought it. Carried it down the valley path folded over her arm, and now she held it out to him. He looked at it. "Didn't take it." "Keep it," he said. "Soren, she would want you to have it," he said. Quiet. "Certain, I know that sounds like something people say, but I knew her, and she would." Something moved in his jaw. "She would want it on someone who doesn't bow." Dina stood in the valley light with the cloak in her hands and felt something happen in her chest that was large and complicated and not entirely comfortable. The feeling of a door opening in a room you'd sealed because you thought you had to. Her wolf wasn't just awake. He was reaching. Dina looked at the moon. At the old stones. At this man who had governed from nothing for 7 years and put his dead mate's cloak on a stranger's shoulders at a festival because it was the only warm thing he had. "I don't know how to do this," she said. "Neither do I," he said. "Not anymore." "What do we do with that?" He was quiet for a moment. "Then we go slowly," he said. "That's all. We go slowly and we tell each other the truth and we see." She looked at him. He was watching the moon, that controlled face with its deep lines and its exhausted honesty. The face of a man who had sealed himself shut and was choosing, with full knowledge of what it had cost him last time, to open again. She thought about her father standing in his guilt for hours. She thought about 43 wolves dissolved in an afternoon. She thought about a borrowed room and a broken stall and 3 years of surviving the wrong kind of alone. She unfolded the cloak, put it back around her own shoulders. Felt the weight of it settle, familiar now. "The right weight?" Slowly, she said. He looked at her then, really looked. And the almost smile arrived fully this time, quiet and private and tired and warm. The first real one she'd seen, she was certain of it. The first real one in a very long time. He didn't reach for her hand. She reached for his, just that, 2 fingers around his wrist. The mirror of what he'd done that first night, brief and deliberate and saying what neither of them was ready to say in words. He turned his hand over. Let her. They stood in the valley as the moon climbed, not talking, not needing to. Her wolf pressed close and quiet and finally still. Beside her, this sealed king breathed the cold air and held her 2 fingers like they were something he intended to keep. Below in the city, the market ran its evening business. Bismuth's lights were on in the inn window. Somewhere a drum was playing. Somewhere a child was laughing. The Blood Moon Festival was over. But the Blood Moon remembered. And some bonds, once the moon had seen them, didn't wait for permission. They simply were. And there it is, the end of the Festival of Fools. Dina Ashwood, who came to a festival to survive a night without causing a scene, left with a king's cloak on her shoulders, a room with a shelf she was already filling in her mind, and 2 fingers around the wrist of a man who had spent 7 years learning to feel nothing. He was done with that now. And she who had sworn she would not trust an alpha again, not ever, was going slowly. That was enough. That was everything. Thank you so much for listening. If you made it to the end, drop a comment with your favorite moment from the whole story. Was it the festival, the valley path, the council room, that last scene with the cloak? Tell us where you're watching from, and if you haven't already, subscribe and hit that notification bell. New stories every week, and some of them, like this one, go places we didn't plan when we started. Next week, a new story, a new moon, a new bond that shouldn't exist. We'll see you there.